Welcome to Jarvis Street Baptist Church, a history. So when speaking of Jarvis Street Baptist Church itself, we can discuss Jarvis Street Baptist Church, the Toronto Baptist Seminary, Gospel Witness, Sovereign Grace Fellowship of Canada, and the Canadian Protestant League. The congregation was founded in 1818. In 1827, it started renting the second floor of a Masonic hall on Market Lane. In 1832, it bought land and built a chapel and was organized as March Street Baptist Church. In 1848, it moved to Bond Street and became Bond Street Baptist Church. And then in 1827, it moved to Jarvis and Gerrard Street and became Jarvis Street Baptist Church. The congregation was founded in 1818. The city of York was then 25 years old with 1,000 inhabitants. The pastor was Alexander Stewart from Scotland, and the congregation would meet in a schoolhouse and a Methodist meeting house in Stewart's home at 76 Yonge Street. It had 9 charter members, which increased to 20 from Britain and Ireland, and it had no minute or roll book. It then started renting the Masonic Hall on Market Lane. So if you look at this map of downtown Toronto, you see in the top right a Jarvis Street Baptist Church at 130 Gerrard Street East. So you'd go down Jarvis Street across St. James Park along King Street, then down a block to what is now known as Colborne Street to see where the church would gather at the Masonic Hall. So this is an old building on what's now known as Colborne Street, because obviously the Masonic Hall has been knocked down. And a child was terrified at the sight of the awful G in the midst of the square and compass. The Masonic Hall on Market Lane, the church was known as Baptist Church of York. And the specific Masonic Hall was Old St. George's Masonic Lodge number 9. It was a 2-story frame building on what is now known as Colborne Street. And the church would meet in the upper room, and the minutes of the actual Masonic Hall state to rent the lodge to the Baptist congregation at 7 shillings 6 pence currency per month for the sole use and benefit of a Sunday meeting on the Sabbath days for a period of 6 months. The old church records are very meager, being confined to dry statements of facts or resolutions. No list of members has been preserved in the church books, and it's doubtful whether anyone knows with certainty who were the real constituent members of the church. Only a few names appear regularly in the minutes. The pastor and president was Alexander Stewart from Scotland. There were 6 families, and baptisms were, weather permitting, for example, in Lake Ontario at the bottom of Bay Street. And First Baptist Church Toronto says it started by renting space from the same Masonic Hall in 1827. The pastor would have been Washington Christian, a Virginia-born former slave. We then come to March Street Baptist Church in 1832, and March Street is now known as Lombard Street. This is a modern photo of Lombard Street, and it's on the north side. The chapel would have been on the north side, and you see at the end there's Jarvis and then the Holiday Inn. So this was where the church would meet. And so you go from Colborne Street, where the Masonic Hall and Market Lane was, and then you go up a few blocks to Lombard Street at Church Street to find where the March Street Baptist Church would have been located. In 1832, there was a cholera epidemic and 217 deaths in York. In 1834, York was incorporated as the new city of Toronto. In 1837 to 38, the Upper Canada Rebellion in Toronto. In 1841, the Act of Union to create the new political entity Province of Canada. And in 1867, there was Confederation. So all of these things happened during the period of March Street Baptist Church. Now, the street was known as March Street, later Stanley Street, and today it's known as Lombard Street. The church bought the land, built a small chapel. It included a baptistry so that baptisms no longer needed to be weather permitting. The seating capacity was 200 when crowded. There were pew rents where people would pay to sit in certain pews. There were 3 Sunday services. Sunday school at 9 a.m., preaching and observance of the Lord's Supper at 11 a.m., and preaching at 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. However, March Street became known as one of the rougher parts of town, with inhabitants making church services very difficult, which required police officers to patrol the streets to keep the peace during the evening worship services. There was a split under John Eglinton Maxwell. Pastor Alexander Stewart was very aged, and Maxwell wanted the church to institute a preaching rotation in a few places around the city and to belong to a Baptist association. And so Maxwell Split would meet at the Masonic Hall. March Street Chapel stood empty for a time because the church had a bent towards contention and schism. The members would meet for prayer meetings at a member's house on Queen Street West, and they rented the chapel to other congregations. But the congregation on March Street reorganized in 1840 with William Hyatt Coombs as pastor, the previous congregations having become defunct. In 1840, it had 13 individuals. And after Coombs' first year, the congregation had to vote whether to re-engage him, and they vote no. And so, as a result, the William Hyatt Coombs, who had come over from England, and I believe a British Baptist Society had funded his first year, he did not survive the vote. And it's at this time where 2 key 19th century figures in the history of the church come into the picture: William McMaster and Robert Alexander Fife. And they are added to a committee to make inquiries about a suitable place to purchase. Robert Alexander Fife is the most significant pastor of the church in the 19th century, the same way T.T. Shields was in the 20th century. He's known as the father of our denomination in Canada. He worked very hard in Ontario, preaching and teaching and raising money for the Canadian Literary Institute. He was principal of Canada Baptist College in Montreal and the Canadian Literary Institute in Woodstock, Ontario. He was involved with the Canadian Baptist Missionary Society in 1852, and also the Temperance Reformation Society of Ontario, an anti-alcohol group. He was also an opponent of clergy reserves, which are tracts of land reserved for the support of the clergy of the Church of England. It was 1/7, or about 14% of the land in Upper and Lower Canada. And he opposed the King's College, which became the University of Toronto, and Upper Canada College, as they would be Church of England. And so he would have been involved in opposing Bishop John Strawn's desire to make these Church of England institutions. He also argued strongly for a closed communion, a closed communion table where baptized believers, and sometimes only members of a regular Baptist church could be included in communion. He was pastor of March Street Baptist Church from 1844 to 1848. And in 1844, there were only 64 members. Toronto had a population of 25,000. There was a secession at this time in which a large portion of the membership and half the wealth were scattered, never again to be gathered. And we saw that as we discussed March Street Baptist Church. In 1846, extraordinarily tragic year for him. Both his infant sons and his wife died during a period of a few months. In 1847, there were insufficient funds by way of subscription to pay his salary, and also there was the move to Bond Street because of the unsavory location that he was involved in. He was also pastor of Bond Street Baptist Church, the next place the church would gather, from 1855 to 1860, and he fought against dispensationalism. In conclusion, for Robert Alexander Fife, J.E. Wells said, "It is in the highest degree improbable that the Baptists of Ontario will ever again be under the rule of a one-man influence at all comparable to that which Dr. Fife wielded so beneficently for a score of years." And you'd see that develop in the 20th century with different Ontario Baptist organizations, denominations such as Convention Baptist, Union of Regular Baptist Churches, Fellowship of Evangelical Baptists, and Sovereign Grace Baptists. The other significant figure is William McMaster. Because of his money, he was rich, and he was willing to spend it on Baptist churches and on Baptist educational institutions. He united with March Street Baptist Church in 1848. He was an immigrant from County Tyrone in Ulster, Ireland, which is now in Northern Ireland, and he arrived in Toronto in 1833. He was a wholesaler of dry goods. He was one of the richest men in Toronto by the 1850s. He was director of Bank of Montreal from 1864 to 1867. He was co-founder and founding president of the Canadian Bank of Commerce from 1867 to 1887, a bank which is today has developed into CIBC. He sat in the Senate from 1867 to 1887 as a Liberal. He financed the Jarvis Street Baptist Church building, Beverly Street Baptist Church, and other Baptist churches. He left his fortune to Baptist education, and he financed Toronto Baptist College on Bloor Street West to the tune of $1 million, and McMaster University in Hamilton. And in 1861, he donated $4,000 after the Canadian Literary Institute's building in Woodstock burned down. So the next stop is Bond Street. So here you have Bond Street Baptist Church from 1848 to 1875. Here's a contemporary, a modern picture of Bond Street and Queen Street East. On the right, you see Metropolitan United Church. On the left, you see St. Michael's Hospital. And so Bond Street Baptist Church would have been located on the property of the current St. Michael's Hospital on Bond Street West Side, between Queen and Shooter Street. And in terms of following along here, you start at the bottom, Colborne Street, where the Masonic Hall was, and then you go to Lombard Street, which is where March Street Baptist Church is, and then you find yourself at Queen Street and Bond Street, where Bond Street Baptist Church was located. It was built by members of the earlier March Street Baptist grouping. In 1848, membership was 100, in 1855, 249, and in the 1860s, 400. They held Sunday services at 11 a.m., evening services at 6 p.m., and Sabbath school, today known as Sunday school, at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Pastor James Piper, who was pastor from 1848 to 1855, argued in favor of believers' baptism with other denominations such as the Presbyterians. And one inspirational story is Thomas Ford Caldecott, who was born 1803, died 1869. He became a member of the congregation in 1831 when it met at Masonic Hall, a deacon in 1832, a lay preacher in 1832. He was ordained in 1834 when the congregation met at March Street Baptist Church, and he became pastor of Bond Street Baptist Church from 1860 to 1869. He instituted systematic beneficence, weekly offering system, increasing receipts, clearing the church's debt, and increasing its contributions to missions, and he encouraged the planting of new churches. And this was something that Bond Street Baptist Church did particularly well, starting up new churches in Toronto. So, for example, in 1866, Bond Street Baptist Church sponsored Alexander Street Baptist Church, which was founded by 27 members from Bond Street Baptist Church. In 1870, families of Bond Street Baptist Church living in Yorkville founded a church with workers from Bond Street Baptist Church. In 1870, a small chapel was built on Schollard Street. In 1871, 26 church members requested letters of dismissal for the purpose of forming a new Baptist church at Yorkville. In 1882, a new building at the southeast corner of Bloor and Bay Streets, now the site of Manufacturers Life Building, was renamed Bloor Street Baptist Church and remained on that site until 1926. And it's this young Bay and Bloor, Bloor Street Baptist Church that started Ossington Avenue Baptist Church in 1886, and in 1911, what would become known as Mount Pleasant Road Baptist Church, and in 1928, York Minster Park Baptist Church. In 1871, the Bond Street Baptist Church sponsored outreach of Parliament Street Baptist Church, which was located on the corner of St. David Street. In 1872, Bond Street Baptist Church was involved in the work that became College Street Baptist Church. And also the Bond Street Baptist Church congregation was active in a work which was continued at Jarvis Street Baptist Church and which later became Beverly Street Baptist Church. So in 1880, the Jarvis Street Baptist Church sponsored Beverly Street Baptist Church at 74 Beverly Street, in between Spadina and University Avenues near Art Gallery of Ontario. And it was funded by William McMaster, and it's now Toronto Chinese Baptist Church. This is Bloor Street Baptist Church, which was at Bay and Bloor. And this is College Street Baptist Church. We now come to Alexander Street Baptist Church, which was started in 1866. So Alexander Street was the first congregation of what was to be many Baptist congregations formed in the next 40 to 50 years within Toronto from the original Bond Street congregation. In 1866, 14 members requested letters of dismissal from Bond Street Baptist Church for the purpose of uniting with others in the foundation of Alexander Street Baptist Church. In 1867, they built a chapel on the south side of Alexander Street between Yonge and Church Streets. Thomas Lely, the owner of a wholesale clothing business, financed the $10,500 cost of construction and was a major contributor to its operating expenses. It sponsored a mission outreach at Dover Court Road Baptist Church in 1879, which was organized as a congregation in 1881. And outreach was also begun at 148 Tecumseh Street South, west of Queen and Bathurst Streets, which was also called Memorial Baptist Church. And that church is today occupied by the Ukrainian Baptist Church congregation. And in 1888, the Alexander Street congregation experienced growth and decided to relocate and build a new church at Jarvis and Wellesley Street, which opened in 1889 and renamed Emmanuel Baptist Church. And the conclusion on Bond Street Baptist Church is that the Bond Street Church, notwithstanding the repeated drafts made upon her to form other churches, has nearly doubled her membership in the last 6 years, and the Alexander Street Church, notwithstanding the drafts made upon her, has more than doubled her communicants during the same period, and the increase of membership has been proportionally yet more rapid in the Yorkville, Parliament Street, and College Street churches, which have all been formed within the past 6 years. Here you see a modern map of downtown Toronto, but you see Bond Street Baptist Church at the bottom at Bond Street and Queen. And so you see these church plants. In the west, you have Beverly Street Baptist Church in 1880 near Art Gallery of Ontario. In the east, at Parliament Street, you have Parliament Street Baptist Church in 1871. You have to the north in the center of the screen Alexander Street Baptist Church in 1866. And then Bloor Street Baptist Church in 1882 at Bay and Bloor. And way over on College Street over in Little Portugal, you have College Street Baptist Church. We now come to Jarvis Street Baptist Church, and here's a 1917 postcard of the church. And Robert Alexander Fife, who was pastor of Bond Street Baptist Church, called it a larger, more convenient, and more beautiful house of worship where you will have greater facilities for doing your work for God. And so Jarvis Street Baptist Church was erected in 1875. It had membership of 519 and income of greater than $7,000. There was a large donation from William McMaster. The cost of the land was $8,500, and at the time of construction, it was very likely one of the tallest buildings in the area. In 1875, remember, there were only 6 Baptist churches in Toronto. And besides William McMaster, another prominent member was Alexander Mackenzie, born 1822, died 1892, who was the second Prime Minister of Canada from 1873 to 1878, and leader of the Liberal Party, and was a member of Jarvis Street Baptist Church from 1879 to 1892. The building's protected under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We come to T.T. Shields, born 1873 and died 1955, the most prominent pastor of Jarvis Street Baptist Church in the 20th century, the same way Robert Alexander Fife was in the 19th century. And he was pastor of Jarvis Street Baptist Church from 1910 to 1955, his death. He was known as the Canadian Spurgeon, and his pastorate encompassed one-third of the congregation's history to that point. One early issue he dealt with was communion. In 1911, individual cups replaced a common cup because of advances in understanding of how viruses and diseases spread. And in 1912, the monthly communion would alternate between evening and morning services, and that replaced the weekly communion. In 1921, there was a split resulting in Park Road Baptist Church with 341 members out of the 1,271 members petitioning for letters of dismissal. In 1922, the church had 3 in-person prayer meetings per week. It owned radio station CJBC from 1925 to 1943 with a 2-hour Sunday evening radio broadcast. T.T. Shields' sermons provided good content, but the cost of radio broadcasting meant the radio station could not continue to be owned by the church. And a big issue at this time at Jarvis Street Baptist Church, and with T.T. Shields particularly, was concerns about liberalism at the Canadian Baptist publication and at McMaster University, which was then in Toronto. And the way this worked out was at the conventions. There was the 1926 Baptist Convention of Ontario and Quebec held in Toronto. And at that convention, T.T. Shields was banned from future conventions. The issue was modernism at McMaster University, specifically liberal professor L.H. Marshall. And this had been developing over time. For example, at the 1919 convention, liberal McMaster professor I.G. Matthews was the issue. At the 1927 convention in Toronto, pro-McMaster progressive disenfranchised Jarvis Street Baptist Church from the convention. There was also during Pastor T.T. Shields' pastorate the 1938 fire. The blaze started in the wiring behind the wall of the organ. T.T. Shields rebuilt. The services were held in Massey Hall. The midweek meetings were held at Cook's Presbyterian Church, which was on the northwest corner of Queen Street East and Mutual Street. And you may recall for decades that was just an empty parking lot, and it's only in the last few years they've started building condos there. And also, as part of the rebuilding process, they built a flat roofed extension to the church, which is sort of where Greenway Chapel is now. And the building was reopened in 1939, even though the fire was in 1938. So now we have Toronto Baptist Seminary, founded in 1927, and this provides us with an opportunity to look at education in the Baptist context. There was Canada Baptist College in Montreal from 1836 to 1849, and Robert Alexander Fife was an interim principal there. There was a Canadian Literary Institute in Woodstock, Ontario in 1860, which the purpose was to educate Baptists and train young men to minister in Baptist churches. Robert Alexander Fife was the principal there from 1860 to 1878. And before William Boyd Stewart became pastor of Bond Street Baptist Church from 1869 to 1872, he served as professor of classics, Greek, and Latin. In 1881, the Faculty of Theology was transferred to Toronto Baptist College, and that was the founding of Toronto Baptist College, also known as McMaster Hall, and later after William McMaster's death in 1887 as McMaster University. But Toronto Baptist College was founded in 1881. Pastor John Castle, who is pastor of Jarvis Street Baptist Church and the Bond Street Baptist Church from 1873 to 1881, and William McMaster, they wanted to move the theological department of Canadian Literary Institute from Woodstock to Toronto. And so in 1881, at its founding, John Harvard Castle was president and first principal. McMaster donated the site of Bloor Street $100,000 plus $14,500 annually plus $900,000 in his will, and it was renamed McMaster University at his death. And then, of course, it became McMaster University in Hamilton in 1927, 1930. And so here we have Toronto Baptist Seminary, which was founded in 1927. And here's Toronto Baptist College, which is now Royal Conservatory of Music. But the Toronto Baptist Seminary was founded by T.T. Shields due to modernism at McMaster University and the 1926 Baptist Convention of Ontario and Quebec, the convention in Toronto. Toronto Baptist Seminary itself was based upon Charles Spurgeon's Pastors College. It was closed for World War II. And one of the first students at the seminary was H.C. Slade, who graduated in 1930, was pastor of Jarvis Street Baptist Church, succeeding T.T. Shields from 1955 to 1974. And it's important to note that in 1948, Central Baptist Seminary was set up in Toronto. W. Gordon Brown, born 1904, died 1979, who was the former dean of Toronto Baptist Seminary, as well as some Toronto Baptist Seminary faculty members and students, formed Central Baptist Seminary. And the merger of Central Baptist Seminary of Toronto with London Baptist Bible College and Seminary formed Heritage College and Seminary in Cambridge in 1993. Also significant are publications, and so T.T. Shields founded the Gospel Witness in 1922. Key Baptist publications or Christian publications would have been the Toronto Christian Observer in 1853, the Canadian Baptist Register, the Canadian Baptist in 1882. Robert Alexander Fife purchased the Christian Messenger, which was begun in 1854, renamed it the Canadian Baptist in 1860, and Robert Alexander Fife was also its editor from 1837 to 1841. And it was also known as the Canadian Baptist Magazine and Missionary Register. In 1871, William Boyd Stewart, who was pastor of Bond Street Baptist Church from 1869 to 1872, was joint proprietor and editor. Now, the Gospel Witness was T.T. Shields' baby, and it was an 8-page weekly during his lifetime. Most of the writing was by its founder, T.T. Shields. Sermons provided content, and it became an alternative to the Canadian Baptist, which T.T. Shields thought was going liberal. And of course, today there is Barnabas, a Sovereign Grace Fellowship of Canada magazine. We also move on to the denominations themselves. So Jarvis Street Baptist Church is a member of the Sovereign Grace Fellowship of Canada. And in the early years in the 19th century, there was Regular Baptists of Canada, the Canada Baptist Union in 1844. Its first annual meeting was at March Street Baptist Church, and it opposed the university and clergy reserves for the Church of England. There was the Regular Baptist Union of Canada in 1880, and again with that one, its first meeting was held at Jarvis Street Baptist Church. The Baptist Baptist Convention of Ontario and Quebec was held in 1888, and its first meeting was at Jarvis Street Baptist Church, even though it would kick out Jarvis Street Baptist Church decades later. And T.T. Shields formed the Union of Regular Baptist Churches in 1928 in response to being kicked out of the convention. And also in 1983, the Sovereign Grace Fellowship of Canada was founded by William Payne, pastor of Trinity Baptist Church in Burlington, Ontario. The Union of Regular Baptist Churches was founded due to the Baptist Convention of Ontario and Quebec banning T.T. Shields from future conventions. T.T. Shields was president. It had membership of 30 churches and representation from 70 others, and it was involved in missionary work as the denominations would, pool the funds of the various churches. And T.T. Shields founded the Regular Baptist Missionary and Education Society of Canada. Also at this time in T.T. Shields' ministry, the Canadian Protestant League was found, and here you see a book published by them, written by Lucien Vinet, I Was a Priest. And so T.T. Shields was president of Canadian Protestant League, and it was founded in 1941 because during World War II, the Roman Catholic Mass was celebrated on Parliament Hill. And the purpose was to counter growing Catholic influence in Canada and resist special concessions to the Roman Catholic Church. The purpose of the Canadian Protestant League was the preservation, maintenance, and assertion of the traditional civil and religious liberties of British subjects, to practice, defend, maintain, and propagate the great doctrines of the Protestant Reformation, and in contradistinction to and in defense against the supreme authority falsely claimed by the Roman Catholic Church, and also against the Roman Church's political methods of propagating its tenets and of extending and exercising this illegitimate authority. The Canadian Protestant League has not survived to the present day. To learn more, you can read Set for the Defense of the Gospel, a bicentennial history of Jarvis Street Baptist Church, 1818 to 2018, edited by Michael Haken and Roy M. Paul. There's also the book that Glenn Tomlinson published on the life of pioneer missionary Alexander Stewart, the first pastor of the church, and from Scotland to Canada. There's also in 1993, Glenn Tomlinson and Andrew Fountain edited a 61-page book, From Strength to Strength, a pictorial history of Jarvis Street Baptist Church, 1818 to 1993. The key book on T.T. Shields was written by Leslie K. Tarr. It came out in 1967, known as Shields of Canada. And also in 1987, the Toronto Baptist Seminary and Bible College self-published By His Grace to His Glory, 60 Years of Ministry, about Toronto Baptist Seminary. Regarding the most significant figure in the 19th century, Robert Alexander Fife, there's a publication of a 40-year survey from Bond Street Pulpit, a sermon Robert Alexander Fife gave prior to the move to Jarvis Street Baptist Church. There's a 460-page biography published in 1885 by J.E. Wells, The Life and Labors of Robert Alexander Fife. And in 1988, a pastor, Theo T. Gibson, published Robert Alexander Fife, His Contemporaries, and His Influence.